Action planning and community engagement, we need to drive change together. I want to make this clear before we begin that we have a very firm position at our school about gender equality and about having a sustainable future together. In essence, in economics and both socio-political sciences, sustainability is the act of using resources so that future generations are not scarce of them. Action planning is the process of creating structured roadmaps to achieve sustainability and gender equality goals that we would set as members of the European Union. We need to set clear objectives, strategize solutions, assign roles and resources, and to us, one of the most important steps to it all is to measure the progress that we get from the actions that we take. So, here are some of the actions that we could take in order to enhance the current situation. We firmly encourage collaboration, as we are a society, we are all part of a society. Collaborating in order to solve problems is a cornerstone to all the issues and solving the issues. We need to raise awareness about the problems because as of 2024, in the European Union, we held an index of equality of 71 out of 100 points. It is one of the higher values of this index, but there are some areas for improvement. We need to raise awareness. We need to empower individuals and organizations by providing tools and opportunities for actions. And we need to have a sustainable impact on society. We need to strengthen long-term community-driven solutions. And I've provided here an example, a local campaign where women-led environment startups collaborate with communities to promote green solutions, which is an absolutely efficient practice that would encourage growth, sustainability, and increase equality. I want to first introduce sort of where this presentation is going to take us. Action planning and community engagement, it's one of the topics of the course, of course. Gender inequality and the climate crisis are two of the most urgent challenges that humanity faces. I am very saddened to know, but at the same time we have to acknowledge the fact that many countries currently are engaging in a society where women do not have the same rights and the same power as a man, which is frankly absurd in the 21st century. As we better understand and make a critical connection between gender, social equity and climate change, it's time that we act towards a solution. From increasing women's representation in leadership decision roles to redistributing care work, which is an incredibly firm cornerstone of unrecognized work from females that I'm going to discuss a little later more in depth. We need to progress towards a gender equal, sustainable future while taking actions today, because these issues corrode and rot our society from within. While being a financier and economist myself, I love statistics, and I firmly believe that taking a stance towards a solution or a problem, we need to have statistics. And this is some data that I have compiled from credible sources, like the European Commission. This is a projected estimate that gender equality within the EU has the potential to boost GDP per capita by 9.6%, which translates to staggering 3.15 trillion euros. And of course, there's another thing towards gender equality. It generates vacant positions for individuals to work, which implies that we have a boost in the quality of life in our economy. A reason highlights the economic justification for advocating gender equality and sustainability. Location, following statement, the progress towards a gender equal and sustainable future starts with taking actions today. I just wanted to add something towards the statistics. As I represent the transport school, I want to add some data from the segment of transport regarding gender equality. So women use public transport more, while males dominate car uses. Female mobility patterns are multitasking trips, work, school, and all errands. And public transport is often unsafe in many, many capitals, unfortunately. And it limits access and opportunities. Less than 22% of women are part of the EU transport workforce as of 2022. Few women in transport leadership roles, and the EU pushes gender-inclusive transport planning, which is what we're trying to engage and raise attention to. Sustainability in transport. 25% of EU GHG emissions, 71% from road transport. We need to prioritize shift to public transport, cycling, electric vehicles, so that we can lower our carbon footprint and be more sustainable in the long run. The gender and sustainability are linked towards those two things. Women favor greener modes of transport, implying that more women enter the workforce, we have a cleaner society. Furthermore, safer, inclusive transport, we need to engage in public transport more, and we need to make our public transport safer for use. And of course, we need to have gender balanced planning, a better in terms of environmental outcomes where, let's say, the teams are balanced out when it comes to males and females. Key statistics, 32% of EU women feel safe on public transport after the dark, which is not a very good statistic at all, implying that 68% of women feel fear and danger, which is definitely bad. There is a 5% shift from car to public transport, which equates to a staggering 15 million tons of CO2 a year in the EU. I want to also mention the gender equality in the work environment. Over the last few decades, 55% of the improvements in food security in developing countries, like our country for a matter of fact, has been driven by programs promoting women's empowerment. Additionally, 75% of the world's food comes from only 12 plants and 5 animal species, making the global food system extremely vulnerable to environmental shocks, such as changing climate patterns and extreme weather events, bringing us back to sustainability. Lower emissions and provoke our ecological sides and be more mindful with using resources. Smallholders who tend to rely on more diverse climate resilient crops represent a sustainable alternative to our current model. In 2023, women made up only 32% of EU's energy workforce, which again needs to be more equal with males and females. Why highlights the gender gap in sustainability sectors, underlying the need for inclusive action planning, where, after the point about smallholders and climate resilient crops. Invest in care. The global economy depends largely on underpaid care work by females, which is a large issue within all economies, and mostly Europe and Asia. This work is not valued in accordance to its work. It's part of the so-called shadow economy, and it's a large-scale issue that needs to be resolved. Care work, much like the environment, is treated like a limitless commodity that can be used without cost, consequence, or economic opportunity cost. Governments should treat care work like a collective good, expanding its availability, providing adequate support to those who do it. This does include investing in the expansion of care services, as well as increasing support for unpaid caregivers, especially in Middle Eastern countries. Investing in care work is not only an acknowledgement, but it's important because in this way we create and foster economic growth. Support women's leadership. This is another very crucial topic. As of the start of the 20th century, there has been a large and exponential increase in women's leadership roles. But at the national and community levels, women represent leadership to drive better environmental outcomes. Countries with high percentages of women in parliament tend to adopt stricter climate change policies, resulting in less emissions, thus more sustainable for our future. At a local level, women participate in managing natural resources. They lead to more equitable and inclusive resource governance and better conservation outcomes. And they tend to be more effective and efficient in their use of resources. Women are more likely to consider their families and communities in decision-making process, crucial to, again, containing sustainability and being more equal. Creating a community engagement plan. Right, social engagement plan is a tool that essentially a society would implement to resolve a given issue. By fostering active participation and collaboration, a plan can mitigate most of the issues. Community engagement plan involves several key aspects. We need to define our purpose and goals inside of the plan. We need to identify the target community or the given issue that we're going to mitigate or try to mitigate, conduct a thorough community assessment and gather information, and determine the most suitable involvement strategies for our colleagues. Developing an action plan, and at the end, implementing the action plan. Community engagement action plan, again, involvement plan is a strategic approach that outlines how an organization or community will involve its members. Private parties and entities like companies engage in these practices. Importantly, social engagement plans operate within the broader context of civil involvement that encompasses the involvement of individuals in the decision-making process that affect lives and communities, again bringing us to gender equality. The instructions for creating the social involvement plan are, as stated here, I hope you can see, creating a community engagement plan, define purpose and goals, define the purpose of social engagement plan by asking why community engagement is important for our initiatives, regardless of whether we're male or female or whatever we're advocating for. Are we seeking input, collaboration, or support from community participants? Are we aiming to build relationships, increase civil participation, or address community concerns? Identify the goals. Should they be specific, measurable? What are we exactly targeting for our cause? Is it achievable? Is it relevant? And is it time-bound, which is very, very important. I will give you an example why being time-bound is adequate. During World War II, 90% of the men in Germany were sent to war. A mere 10%, which in fact of those 10%, 80% of the men left from the 10% were unable to work. What does that mean for a country? It's essentially a crisis because there's no workforce, there's nobody to sustain the economy. What happened at the time was that women took over 90% of the spots that were left out by men that were sent to war. That means that essentially there's no difference. The economy can still run regardless if it's a male or a female worker, and we need to have equality and equal pay towards all kinds of jobs and occupations, despite the gender and race. We need to identify the target community as part of the action plan. When we're defining the community, we need to find a purpose, a goal to our engagement plan. And the next step is, of course, to identify a specific target. We might say, okay, we're going to look at a sector in Bulgaria, for example, transport sector, and we want to increase the amount of women that are working in the given sector. We need to identify the target community and tailor our strategies. How exactly are we going to mitigate the issues? Are we talking that there's some kind of specific unemployment that's targeted by women? Is maternity leave the issue? And we need to find out what exactly causes the problem and then devise a plan to resolve the problem. It could be a neighborhood, a specific demographic, such as young people, let's say women aged 18 to 24, for example, as a age group. Or a community of interest, such as environmental activists. In the last 8 to 10 years, there's been a huge rise in environmentalists that try to advocate for a more neutral society and for a more sustainable development of the economy that doesn't cause issues in nature. Understanding the characteristics that meet the target audience will enable you to tailor your engagement methods to meet their specific preferences and concerns. Our target need to gain a comprehensive, clear understanding of the community, conduct research, which is, I would argue, one of the most important parts of engaging in any solution towards a problem, and gather relevant data. Demographics, background information, cultural insights, socioeconomic factors, and historical context. We need to look for existing community organizations, leaders, and influences, so that we can provide valuable insight and help establish connections. Essentially, why make new organizations where there's already established organizations that just need help to boost their efficacy and resolve the issue in a swift manner? Involved in active listening and open dialogue with community participants to understand their perspectives, aspirations, and challenges. This is also something that's been very overlooked by the European Union. We like to send help without exactly knowing what kind of help the audience that we're sending the help to needs. For example, yes, you can throw money at countries, but more or less it's not very effective, because in some areas of the world, corruption is a large-scale issue that's been, of course, kind of swept under the rug. But at the same time, we need more specific targeting. Let's say in Africa, we're trying to resolve an issue with a given disease. These people don't need bolts of cash or guns or things that won't necessarily make the life of an average citizen that might get infected better. Conduct community assessment, provide valuable insight into the community's needs, assets, challenges, and existing resources, interest and communication preferences, and of course look around for barriers to our policies. It helps tailor engagement strategies to address specific community dynamics and maximize the effectiveness of our plan and the utilization of our resources. Key components to consider when conducting community assessment is to gather information, collect data, and information about the community through various sources and data that we can find, including demographics, socioeconomic indicators, and historical context. When it comes to community assessment, we need to identify community assets, strengths, and resources that, as I mentioned, we can use to sort of make our policy more effective towards resolving issues. It can include local organizations, community leaders, and all sorts of cultural assets. Assess needs and priorities, as I mentioned again. We need to look at where the problem is derived from and not just have a homogenized solution as throwing money to a country and then calling it a day and resolve the issue, because it does not resolve the issue. More about community assessment. We need to identify the challenges and barriers, and also Another thing that is crucially important when employing policies is that we need to involve stakeholders. We need to hold key stakeholder analysis within the community, such as leaders and organizations that might have an influence on society. Because again, I could be telling you all of this and it wouldn't matter if my speech and my presentation would not in some way touch your senses and your mind, and somehow you could feel the attachment towards what I'm saying. By conducting a comprehensive community assessment, you gain a deeper understanding of the target community, therefore allowing a policy to be much more effective in mitigating a problem. And we need to build on given society's strength and overcome barriers to involvement, ensure social engagement plan is responsive and impactful. We need to determine engagement strategies. When determining engagement strategies, consider selecting methods and tools that are accessible and inclusive to the country. Again, we need something effective. We need something that's fast and something that does not cause structural issues. One of the biggest killers of policies, whenever we have structural problems, policies are not effective, and it's just a waste of resource and time where issues might be exacerbated in the long run. We need to tailor our strategies to align with community preferences, and of course we need to actively participate. It does not mean that sending funds to a given country to resolve an issue, we call it a day. No, we send organizations from our countries, from our institutions to go and help hand on hand with resolving the issue, whatever it might be. And of course, I've always been a strong advocate for technology, as I think despite some issues, ethical issues with technology can allow for more focus when it comes to policies. Online platforms can reach a broader audience and provide convenient channels for involvement. We need to incorporate educational components. I really love to give the example of Japan when it comes to education and how education fosters very mindful individuals. In Japan, there isn't a single public school that has janitors. Japanese culture allows students to clean up after themselves. There's no janitors. You spill something, you clean it up yourself. At the end of a school day, they are encouraged to look after their environment. And I think that providing some form of hybrid variant to this would be very beneficial to our society in making us more grateful towards what we have and the resources of our nature. We need to be mindful with time constraints. Some issues are timely matters and we need to resolve quickly. Implementing those strategies can create an environment that promotes meaningful community involvement and fosters a sense of ownership and control. When it comes to developing an action plan, we need to, as I mentioned, set clear goals, be punctual, be efficient, and not waste resources around. We also need to allocate necessary resources towards resolving the issue, and consider the communication channels and platforms that will be used, and establish, of course, realistic timelines. There's been many times in history where some leaders, despite rather being authoritarian, they make certain plans that are simply unachievable. These plans then discourage people and the effect of the policy is completely demolished. And thus, having an achievable plan is what we want to strive for. Establish...
First, unlock your phone.
A well-developed action plan provides a roadmap for successful implementation. And here's some steps on how to implement the plan, which I hope you can see. Implement engagement strategies outlined in your plan, active and involved community, target community, and select methods and tools. maintain an open line of communication where feedback is important and when it comes to resolving the issue, create a welcoming and inclusive environment for all members of the given policy. Monitor the progress, gather feedback from the community, and be prepared to make necessary adjustments. Many policymakers believe that we set a policy and forget about it. There's instances where environments change and we need to act in accordance to the changes. Evaluate and measure results. Assess whether, whenever we implement a policy, we need to assess whether or not the policy is effective or it isn't, what we need to improve. We need to assess the objectives and the goals that have been already achieved, collect review from community participants through surveys, focus groups, and other feedback mechanisms. I bring you again to statistics. I'd say that surveys are important, but survey types are also important because some surveys are just not suited to give an objective representation of the environment. You might have qualitative or quantitative data. Qualitative data gives you a spectrum of how well something is done. Quantitative data is simply numbers. So giving surveys, let's say if you're going to help an African country, you're trying to find out what they need. You can't just give them numbers and say, how are you satisfied with this policy? That doesn't tell the whole picture and where the issues are. Evaluation process allows you to identify successful strategies, areas for enhancements, and lessons learned that can inform future participation plans. This brings me back to the educational side of things. We need to foster continuous improvements. It's essential to foster a culture of continuous improvement in your community, identify areas of enhancement, reflect on lessons that have been learned from prior policies, and drive positive change. Essentially, you find an issue, you note the issue, and you resolve the issue. There are various tools available to support effective communication and participation for all members that might be in the community, and the tools that we use are online forums, discussion boards like this, as such, only physical, community gathering places, like this one especially, physical spaces where we can communicate ideas, topics, and discuss issues that need attention and solutions, and storytelling platforms, like my colleague introduced, blogs, social media, dedicated storytelling platforms that allow community participations to inform, similarly to social media, I would say. Social media is a powerful tool that I think is underutilized when it comes to resolving issues because it's essentially a mirror towards everybody's life and daily issues in their community. We have other tools that I discussed slightly earlier. Instant input surveys that collect and gather data that is then analyzed by specialists, and perhaps you could find a correlation. Polls, effective tools, gathering quick opinions. There's some institutions that go around and just listen to people on the street, interview them to gather information on a given topic. And these tools make an inclusive and accessible environment for community participants to engage in action planning. And as a slight conclusion towards what we have already said, discussed during this meeting, a well-crafted social engagement plan is a very powerful tool that, when utilized with civil engagement, has the chance to really output a solution towards a problem that might appear within our community. By following the steps, organization initiatives can make comprehensive plans that foster meaningful connections, build trust, and ensure community participants have a voice in sharing, have a sharing voice in what is going on in their community. Essentially, this is the basis of democracy. Without having a voice in your own community, well, it's really a democracy. We're living in a free world. Through continuous improvements and adaptations, we can make a long and lasting positive change to our environment, which we strongly advocate for. Here are my citations and resources that I've used. Again, all credible statistics, websites, and data resource centers. And we'd like to thank you for your attention. And that was it.
I just want to say something, because as you know, our next step will be to engage the girls on the implementation of this community plan. So this will be a very, very useful resource, because we need to create a template and create guidelines to engage the girls on doing some local projects in their communities. We don't want to change the world.
Yes.
But we want to have impact in the communities.
Well, thank you all very much for your attention.
Yes.